Hey everyone, Jamie here from Stop the Money Pipeline. For our last segment of this town hall, it's my pleasure to introduce to you Senator Jeff Merkley of Oregon. Senator Merkley is one of our strongest climate champions in the Senate. He's consistently stood up to the power of the fossil fuel industry and the Trump administration's polluter agenda. He's the author of the Keep It in the Ground Act, and just recently is introducing legislation that would bar the Trump administration from using the coronavirus pandemic to give handouts to the fossil fuel industry. Senator Merkley, thank you so much for joining us today.
You're welcome, Jamie. It's great to be with you all. I first of all have to put on my Earth Day hat, make the Earth cool again, if you can see that. I must say that it was very strange to be celebrating Earth Day yesterday, realizing how little we're doing to serve and improve or stop the damage to our beautiful blue-green planet. The Keep in the Ground strategy that I introduced a few years was followed up by a detailed bill to do 100% renewable energy. And what we find is the fossil fuel industry blocking us at every point. In fact, still trying to dip into the federal trough to strengthen and extend their reign over the energy economy, the exact opposite of what we should be doing. As we look at the coronavirus challenge right now, we can see that if you ignore science and delay action, you're in deeper trouble. We were in deeper trouble because the administration ignored science and delayed action on personal protective equipment, delayed action on testing. They're not moving fast enough on vaccines. It's the same thing, but intensified in terms of the challenge we have with our warming planet. So thank you for participating in Stop the Money Pipeline in this effort to mobilize so many groups to say this is absolutely essential. We have to carry our advocacy not just to Congress from the outside through all of your groups, but then we also this year have to carry that advocacy into the election. We need a blue-green, if you will, Senate and House and Oval Office. In the bill that we're introducing next week, and I'm doing it in partnership with Representative Nanette Berrigan and John Huffman and Representative Omar on this House side, and on the Senate side with Bernie Sanders and Ed Markey. One of the things we're trying to tackle is that the banks are planning to take in equity ownership of fracking companies that are going bankrupt, and they need a waiver to do that. And they want to sustain those companies and then sell them when the price of oil goes up. And so that's extending, if you will, this very damaging strategy across America. So maybe we can block that. That's one piece of this effort. A second is the president's massive $500 billion slush fund to guarantee lending to mega corporations. First thing he did is he threw out the head of the oversight board because he doesn't want oversight on it. But we know it's a setup essentially for helping out a lot of fossil fuel companies. Again, the wrong direction to go. So our goal is to make it so that such fossil fuel companies are not eligible for such lending from the Federal Reserve guaranteed through that fund. And then another strategy they're employing is to say, well, we've got this strategic petroleum reserve. Why don't we not only buy oil to fill that reserve, but let's create a virtual reserve, meaning we'll buy oil from oil producers that are already where the oil's still in the ground in order to essentially prop up those companies until they can start pumping that oil out of the ground. So putting a cap on the Strategic Petroleum Reserve that is equal to the actual physical capacity of the reserve is a way to stop this virtual expansion of this massive subsidy, really an unlimited potential subsidy to the fossil fuel industry. Meanwhile, on the positive side, we want to get energy efficiency block grant funding. We want to get tax benefits for renewable energy. It's all within the framework of saying, let's use this opportunity to fight the coronavirus to also fight the challenge of climate change and help drive the transition to renewable energy. Let's recognize that's in our national security. Let's recognize that we can create millions of good paying jobs, millions of good paying union jobs, rather than let this administration essentially continue to subsidize fossils to the detriment of the United States and the planet as a whole. So that's the goal that we're hoping to introduce next week. And I'll turn it back to you, Jamie.
Thanks so much, Senator. And our first question today for the town hall comes from Yena Perice. Yena, go ahead.
Hi, my name is Yena Perice. I live in Portland, Oregon. I'm a junior in high school, a youth organizer and activist, and also the state communications director for the Oregon chapter of the U.S. Youth Climate Strike. Senator Merkley, in our state of Oregon, the Jordan Cove LNG project threatens drinking water, ecosystems, tribal territories, private property, and local businesses throughout Southern Oregon. And if built, it would also be the largest source of greenhouse gas emissions in our entire state of Oregon. I'd like to thank you for continuously standing up against this project during your time in office, and I'd also like to bring up the fact that JP Morgan Chase is one of the largest funders of the company trying to build this project. So thousands of people today are taking virtual action against Chase Bank and speaking up against the bank's dominant role in supporting the fossil fuel industry and the destruction of our communities and the climate. So I'm curious, what do you think our elected officials can do to rein in the power of big money like banks, insurance agencies, and asset managers, and also force them to stop writing checks for the fossil fuels industry's dirty work? So I would love to hear what climate champions like you can do to stop this, and what you think youth activists like myself can do to support that work.
Yena, greetings, and I love the poster behind your head that says, "Let the youth be heard." And this is so important on the issue of climate because it's younger Americans who recognize that when the current governing generation is gone, our failures will create enormous challenges for the next generation. So we have to act now. We can't afford to wait until we have our youth who are in high school today be holding the Senate and House offices 20 or 30 years from now. So thank you. And on Jordan Cove, I was really, it was a very significant issue for me to come out and say we should not build this. We cannot build more fossil fuel infrastructure. And also that the pipeline itself, for 10 years, the use of eminent domain was being used like a sort of Damocles over the property owners in the path, and that's still there. And it's the government taking private property for an out-of-country, for-profit corporation. And so both on the climate front and in terms of rights, it was absolutely the wrong way to go. I'm pleased to note that this year, after 2 years, I've been standing alone on this. Congressman DeFazio has joined in opposing Jordan Cove, and Senator Wyden just about 2 weeks ago joined in that effort as well. So building coalition. You focused on the financing side. And one of the areas on finance we can really push on is cutting off all funding to international organizations that are funding fossil fuel projects. Then we have another level of how do we go about addressing our own financial institutions within our nation, like Chase and Goldman and so on and so forth. That is, I think, a tougher challenge, but at any time that they're applying for subsidies like they are now, we have leverage because we can say, if you're going to fund fossil fuel projects, you cannot, in fact, be eligible for this funding, this subsidy. So that is, it can be tax credits that they're seeking, or tax deductions they're seeking, or anything else. Those can be used as leverage, so they're not available. To get that done, though, we have to have a different Senate. The Senate right now is run by the fossil fuel industry. They are the power behind the throne. And just the short version of that is in 2014, they invested hundreds of millions of dollars in Senate campaigns and got Mitch McConnell the majority and made him majority leader. And so he does everything he can for the fossil fuel world. If we're going to tackle them with national legislation, we have to have a very different Senate, and we have an opportunity to do that this year.
Thank you so much, Senator. And our next question comes from Alex P-Begay. Alex, go ahead.
Ja, es geht durch den es Keith Begay in the shed on the Trabang in the Schle, Best Bashin, Billagan, hello, Senator. Yate, hello, friends and relatives. My name is Alex Begay from the Navajo Nation, the Great Dene Nation. And I come from the first peoples of the land, indigenous to the areas. And for me, I'm an activist and writer, speaker, all these things that others can probably more eloquently put. But I also am a simple, humble man, and I speak for my people. And that's what I've tried to hold myself to and continue to do. So speaking for the people, Senator, I'm just wondering how we can move forward, including the indigenous people in the talks of climate change and other aspects that I know you're an ally and work in development with the bills that you have proposed.
Thank you, Alex, and I like your Bears Ears t-shirt. One of the things that was on the agenda for the Trump administration was, after cutting Bears Ears, they wanted to cut the Cascade Siskiyou monument in Oregon that I had gotten doubled in size. And so not only was I fighting with you on Bears Ears, but I was feeling it very personally since we were next on their list. Hopefully we'll have a whole different administration with a whole different view shortly. One of the issues we've done in terms of indigenous rights is try to say that for every proposal that's put forward, there has to be substantial and significant consultation, and make that an issue of law, that has to happen with our First Nation partners, and that there has to be significant understanding and regard for protecting cultural artifacts that may be relevant, or sacred ground that may be relevant to our First Nations. And then we need, whenever there is a project that directly confronts the integrity of tribal lands, it doubles down on our effort to be partners with you in opposition. Kind of, the fossil fuel is bad enough, but then it becomes an issue of a tyrannical government overriding the rights of people. We need to stand in partnership with you. I was very struck in Canada, where Trudeau said when he was coming into office, "I am a climate champion, and I'm going to really, really demonstrate how this is done." And then what he did instead was he had his government buy out the Trans Mountain pipeline to triple the pipeline serving the tar sands. And he did so over the opposition of many First Nation opponents whose land it crosses. And so we need to stand in partnership with our tribes, Indian country here in America, but also with indigenous rights and organizations internationally.
Thank you, Senator. We just have about 4 minutes left, but I want to hand it over to my colleague Moira to ask a question that's coming from our audience who's watching online.
Hi, Senator. So while you've been speaking, I've been moderating the chat, and we have lots of questions rolling in, and lots of compliments on your hat as well. But a lot of folks are asking sort of how we both respond to the current crisis of the COVID-19 pandemic, and also assure that we can have a livable future and a just transition for workers and communities around this country. Can you respond to that?
Yeah, well, let me place it in the context of the discussion about the Green New Deal. And there's been so much mockery of the Green New Deal. But it boils down to 4 core principles that I think are absolutely right on. One is we have an absolutely massive challenge to drive this transition from fossil fuel energy to renewable energy as the foundation for our energy economy, and all the damage that's coming from the fossil fuel world. So the second principle is we have to respond to that massive threat, that massive challenge, with enormous urgency and enormously robust programs. And the third, that is, in driving that transition, we can create millions of good paying jobs. And the fourth is we can work to direct a lot of those jobs to communities that desperately need them, former fossil fuel communities, to rural and frontier communities, as we call them in Oregon, that are even more rural than rural. And then to frontline urban communities that have absolutely been bypassed in terms of economic development in the past. And I've had conversations with groups, activist groups that are in those frontline communities all across America. There's tremendous potential here to harness programs that create employment and activity and advocacy that will strengthen those communities. And that ranges from those groups launching community solar projects that not only harvest the energy from the sun, but create economic development in their community, to being engaged in kind of the broader strategies that are being implemented in a community or in a state.
Well, thank you so much, Senator, for joining us today. We really appreciate your leadership and your help keeping up this fight.
You're welcome, Jamie. Thank you, everybody, for being part of this whole effort. We need massive outside pressure to move things inside the building, and we need a new crew inside the building that is going to listen and respond to the outside advocacy. So let's work on both fronts this year. We have to make a pivot this year in both parts of that. Thank you so much and take care.
Thank you so much, and thank you for everybody watching this town hall, and let's keep up the fight to stop the money pipeline. Thank you all so much.